Welcome to American Legacies, where we explore incredible stories of the people who shaped the nation. From founders like Benjamin Franklin to creators like Walt Disney, barrier breakers like Rosa Parks to stars like Frank Sinatra. Whether they led revolutions, inspired generations, or changed the course of history, their stories are woven into the fabric of America. Join us as we uncover the triumphs, struggles, and legacies of the heroes of our country. Let's get started. Francis Marion was born around 1732 on his family's plantation in the Berkeley County area of colonial South Carolina. He was the youngest of 6 children, born to Gabriel Marion and Charlotte Cordis Marion, a family of French Huguenot descent. His paternal grandfather had fled religious persecution in France and settled in South Carolina in the late 1600s. The Marion family initially prospered as planters, but Francis's father later tried his hand as a merchant in Georgetown and went bankrupt, leaving young Francis to make his own way in life. There are no detailed records of Francis's formal schooling, which was not uncommon on the colonial frontier. Whatever education he had likely came from practical experience on the farm and the South Carolina backcountry. Marion's early childhood was unremarkable in many ways, though an oft-repeated anecdote highlights his small stature and unlikely start. A fellow officer, Peter Horry, later quipped that at birth, Francis was not larger than a New England lobster and might easily have been put into a quart pot. In fact, he was a small boy and reportedly had malformed legs in youth. Despite this, he grew into a resilient young man. By the age of 15, restless and seeking adventure, he signed on as a sailor aboard a schooner headed to the West Indies. This youthful voyage turned into a harrowing trial when, according to legend, the ship was rammed by a whale and sank, forcing the 7-man crew into a lifeboat. He and a few others survived a week adrift at sea before reaching shore. The ordeal left a deep impression on the teenager. Francis supposedly declared he'd had enough of the sea and vowed to remain on solid land thereafter. It was a formative experience for the young man, one that tempered his character and perhaps instilled the caution and toughness he would later need in war. After this brush with death at sea, Francis returned to South Carolina and began managing his family's plantation. He spent his late teens and early 20s working the land and honing skills like hunting, trapping, and fishing in the wilderness along the Santee River. These long hours in the swamps and backwoods made him intimately familiar with the terrain of the Low Country, knowledge that would prove invaluable in years to come. By his mid-20s, he had established himself as a competent farmer. In 1773, with the modest success he achieved, he even purchased his own small plantation called Pond Bluff. But larger events were about to reshape Marion's quiet planter life. The colony's conflicts and the call to arms would soon draw him into military service, setting him on the path to lasting fame. Francis's first taste of military life came during the French and Indian War. In 1756, at about 24 years old, he joined a provincial militia unit as conflicts with hostile Cherokee Indians flared up on the Carolina frontier. This regional fighting, known locally as the Cherokee War, was the southern part of the larger French and Indian War. Marion served under Captain, later Colonel William Moultrie, and others in campaigns against the Cherokee, who had attacked frontier settlements. The fighting was brutal on both sides. His militia helped defeat the Cherokee in South Carolina, subduing the resistance. He observed that the Cherokee did not fight in neat European-style lines. Instead, they used the landscape to their advantage, hiding in forests and swamps to stage ambushes. Marion took note of how effective these irregular tactics could be. 2 decades later, he would famously adopt similar methods against the British. In short, his early military experience on the wild frontier gave him a crash course in guerrilla warfare long before the American Revolution began. When the Cherokee War ended, Francis returned to civilian life. For the next dozen years, he lived the dry-bread existence, a quiet life of a gentleman farmer, as biographer Hugh Rankin put it. He tended his plantation and built a local reputation for diligence. By the early 1770s, however, the political climate in the American colonies was heating up. Tensions with Britain were rising, and Marion's homeland of South Carolina was no exception. He aligned with the Patriot cause for American independence. In 1775, as colonists organized revolutionary governments, he was elected to the South Carolina Provincial Congress, the colony's makeshift legislature advocating self-governance. That same year, After the first shots of the revolution were fired at Lexington and Concord in April 1775, South Carolina began raising regiments of state troops. His blend of local standing and military experience earned him a commission as a captain in the 2nd South Carolina Regiment in June 1775. This regiment was part of the state's contribution to what would become the Continental Army. Marion, now in his early 40s, traded farm life for a Patriot uniform just as the Revolution got underway. Francis's early Revolutionary War service was marked by duty and dependability, if not yet glory. His first assignment was to help build and garrison Fort Sullivan, a palmetto log fort guarding Charleston Harbor. When a British fleet attacked Charleston in June 1776, he and about 400 Carolinians under Colonel William Moultrie defended Fort Sullivan, later renamed Fort Moultrie, and successfully repulsed the Royal Navy. He fought bravely in the Battle of Sullivan's Island, contributing to one of the first major American victories of the war. The victory boosted Patriot morale, and he was promoted to lieutenant colonel for his role in the defense. For the next few years, however, he saw relatively little action. He remained stationed around Charleston, struggling to instill discipline in his troops, whom he complained were a drunken bunch, often showing up to roll call barefoot. It wasn't until 1779 that Marion's unit was called to another major engagement, the Siege of Savannah. In the fall of 1779, American and French forces attempted to recapture Savannah, Georgia from the British. Marion commanded the 2nd South Carolina Regiment during this assault, but the attack failed, and Savannah remained in British hands. It was a demoralizing defeat for the Patriots, and one of the bloodiest battles of the war. By early 1780, the war in the South was entering a crisis. The British had turned their focus to the southern states, aiming to rally loyalists and deal a crushing blow. In the spring of 1780, British General Sir Henry Clinton launched a massive siege of Charleston, South Carolina. As Charleston came under threat, Francis was in the city ready to defend it. Then fate intervened in an odd way. In March 1780, he attended a dinner party in Charleston at the home of a fellow officer. According to tradition, the host locked the doors, as was the 18th century custom, to prevent guests from leaving during the endless series of patriotic toasts. Marion, who was not a drinking man, felt trapped as the alcohol flowed. Determined to escape the drunken revelry, he jumped from a second-story window to flee the party. He broke his ankle in the fall and had to leave Charleston to recuperate in the countryside. This impulsive act of temperance had a fortunate consequence. He was absent when Charleston fell. In May 1780, the city surrendered to the British, a devastating loss that wiped out much of the Southern Continental Army. Because of his injury, he avoided capture by the British, an accident that would allow him to continue the fight when almost all organized Patriot forces in South Carolina had been wiped out. It was at this low point of the Revolution that Francis Marion's legend truly began. After the fall of Charleston in 1780, the American cause in the South looked bleak. British troops under General Charles Cornwallis fanned out across South Carolina, and with Charleston's garrison lost, the Continental Army presence was almost non-existent. What remained were scattered Patriot militia bands and partisan leaders who refused to give up. Francis, now recovered from his ankle injury, and in his late 40s, emerged as one of these determined leaders. He slipped away into the rural wetlands with a small group of volunteer militiamen rather than surrender. Marion's first significant action as a partisan commander came in August 1780, just weeks after the Americans' crushing defeat at the Battle of Camden, where General Horatio Gates's main army was routed. With only about 50 militia volunteers, he staged a daring raid on a British encampment at dusk. Using the element of surprise and the dense cover of cypress swamps, his men attacked from the rear. In this engagement, sometimes called the Raid at Great Savannah, Marion succeeded in rescuing 150 American prisoners who were about to be transported by the British. It was a stunning upset. A tiny force of irregulars outmaneuvered a larger British detachment. Over the next months, Francis's band roamed the low-country swamps, striking British outposts, supply lines, and loyalist militia detachments. Francis understood that with his small numbers, he could not win an open-pitched battle. Instead, he hit and run relentlessly. He and his men would appear out of the swamps to ambush enemy patrols or supply wagons, then vanish into the wilderness before British reinforcements could arrive. These guerrilla tactics frustrated British commanders and earned him growing renown. Between August and December 1780, Marion's name became famous or infamous, across South Carolina. He won engagements at places like Black Mingo Creek and Tearcoat Swamp, harassing enemy forces and disrupting British communication lines. Perhaps most importantly, his success began to inspire local patriots and dishearten loyalists. Historian Sean Busick noted that by needling the enemy and inspiring patriotism among the locals, he helped make South Carolina an inhospitable place for the British. In effect, Marion's guerrilla campaign kept the revolutionary spirit alive in the South at a time when formal armies had been defeated. It was during this period that Francis earned the nickname that would cement his place in American folklore, the Swamp Fox. The origin of the moniker came in November 1780, after one particularly dramatic chase. British Lieutenant Colonel Banastre Tarleton, a fearsome cavalry officer known for his ruthlessness and speed, was tasked with hunting down Marion. Tarleton and his Green Dragoons pursued his elusive band for hours across nearly 26 miles of difficult terrain. Marion led Tarleton on a wild chase through swamps and forests, always just out of reach. After roughly 7 hours, Tarleton, frustrated and exhausted, called off the pursuit. He is reported to have cursed in exasperation, "As for this damned old fox, the devil himself could not catch him." The colorful description spread quickly among both friend and foe. Marion had outfoxed his pursuers, and thereafter locals and soldiers alike began referring to him as the Swamp Fox. The nickname captured Marion's strategy and persona perfectly: crafty, elusive, and at home in the swampy terrain. It also provided a morale boost to patriots. The Swamp Fox's exploits proved the British were not invincible in the southern woods. Francis did not operate entirely alone. He coordinated at times with other patriot leaders as the war in the South entered its final phase. In late 1780, General Nathaniel Greene arrived to take command of the rebuilt Continental forces in the Carolinas, replacing General Gates. Unlike some militia leaders who often acted independently, he proved very willing to cooperate with Continental Army officers. Greene recognized his value and gave him free rein to continue guerrilla operations, while also integrating Marion's men into larger plans when needed. One fruitful partnership was with Lieutenant Colonel Henry Lee, a Continental cavalry commander. In the spring of 1781, his militia and Lee's legion joined forces to attack a chain of British posts. Together they captured Fort Watson, seizing a key British supply fort on the Santee River, and they took Fort Mott, compelling the British to abandon their position at nearby Camden, South Carolina. These victories by Marion and Lee forced the British to begin pulling back toward the coast. In September 1781, he also played a significant role in the last major conventional battle in the Carolinas, the Battle of Eutaw Springs. Marion, by now a militia brigadier general, commanded the South Carolina militia on the front lines alongside General Andrew Pickens at Eutaw Springs. In this hard-fought engagement, American forces under Greene attacked the British. The battle ended in something of a bloody draw, but the British suffered such heavy casualties that they ceased major inland operations in the Carolinas thereafter. General Cornwallis, instead of trying to reconquer the Carolinas, moved his army to Virginia, a decision that led directly to his entrapment at Yorktown a month later. Thus, his steady pressure in South Carolina contributed to the larger strategic success of the Revolution. In recognition of his service, he received formal thanks from the Continental Congress for a daring rescue of American troops surrounded by the enemy at Parker's Ferry in August 1781. Around this time, he was also promoted to the rank of brigadier general in the state militia. By the end of 1781, the tide had turned. The British were confined to Charleston and would evacuate for good in December 1782. Marion's year-long campaign of irregular warfare had helped make that British defeat possible. Through these exploits, Francis became one of the great heroes of the Southern theater of the war. It's important to note that he never commanded a large regular army or fought a major battle on his own. His contributions came in the form of many small skirmishes and clever strategies, rather than grand victories like Saratoga or Yorktown. Histories of the Revolution often focus on George Washington's campaigns in the North, meaning Marion's swamp skirmishes remained more of a regional legend. Yet within South Carolina and among the Continental leadership, his impact was enormously significant. One famous Revolutionary War anecdote captures Marion's resourcefulness during this period. In early 1781, he and his militia were encamped on Snow's Island, one of his swamp hideouts, when a British officer arrived under a flag of truce to negotiate a prisoner exchange. He invited the British officer to stay for dinner, which turned out to be nothing more than a humble meal of roasted sweet potatoes, served on pieces of bark. According to accounts that circulated later, the officer was astonished that this ragged band of Americans could survive on such scant provisions. The legend goes that the British officer was so impressed by Marion's determination and the Patriots' dedication to their cause despite hardships that he returned to his camp and resigned his commission, declaring that such men could not be defeated. This story, though likely apocryphal, or at least embellished, spread widely after the war. A popular painting of Marion depicts this scene, complete with his black servant, Oscar, roasting the sweet potatoes over the fire, and hangs in the U.S. Capitol. The sweet potato dinner anecdote underscored his legend as the noble American underdog who made do with nothing and still outfoxed the British. It's one of many tales that made Francis Marion a larger-than-life figure in American lore. When the guns of the Revolution fell silent, Francis, now in his early 50s, returned to the quiet life he had left. The war had ravaged South Carolina, and his own plantation, Pond Bluff, was reportedly destroyed by the British during the conflict. Marion arrived home to find even his enslaved workers had been relocated or had fled, as the British had offered freedom to slaves who left rebel owners. Despite these setbacks, he resumed his role as a planter, rebuilding what he could of his estate. In 1782, with the war effectively over, he also re-entered public life. South Carolina's new state government appointed him commander of a militia brigade in the peacetime state militia, a ceremonial post acknowledging his wartime service. More significantly, he served several terms in the South Carolina State Senate from 1782 to 1790. In the legislature, he proved to be a voice of moderation and reconciliation. He notably opposed harsh punitive measures against loyalists who had sided with the British. At a time when many sought vengeance, he argued for amnesty and rebuilding, believing it was essential to heal the state's wounds. Historian Busick counts Marion's championing of amnesty for former enemies among the most admirable things he ever did, showing that his sense of honor extended beyond the battlefield. In 1790, he participated in South Carolina's Constitutional Convention, helping to write the new state constitution as the young nation organized its governments. In gratitude for his service, the state also appointed Marion to an honorary post as commander of Fort Johnson in Charleston Harbor in 1784. Francis began to withdraw from public life as his health declined. He retired fully to his plantation, which he continued to farm. He died on February 27, 1795, at Pond Bluff in South Carolina. He was 63 years old. The cause of death was likely complications from old war wounds, or simply the wear of age. He was buried at the estate of his brother Gabriel at Belle Isle Plantation in what is now Berkeley County. His grave, marked by a simple tomb, can still be seen there today. At the time of his death, Marion was praised and mourned in South Carolina as a state hero. In his funeral eulogies, he was remembered as the patriot general who had never wavered, the resourceful swamp fox who had saved the state in its darkest hour. He left behind his wife Mary and a grateful nation. His contemporaries understood that his legacy would live on, but even they could hardly have guessed how legend would eventually elevate Francis Marion into a near mythical figure in American history. In the decades following his death, Francis's legend only grew. Americans, proud of their revolutionary heroes, hungered for stories of daring and virtue from the war. Biographers and storytellers stepped in to satisfy that appetite. Perhaps the most influential was Mason Locke Parson Weems, the same colorful writer who fabricated the famous cherry tree tale about George Washington. In 1809, Weems, together with one of Marion's former officers, Peter Horry, published The Life of General Francis Marion. Weems openly admitted that he had endeavored to throw some ideas and facts about General Marion into the garb and dress of a military romance. In other words, he wasn't above embellishing the truth to make a good story. Weems's biography introduced many of the enduring legends about him, painting him as an almost chivalric figure, cunning but honorable, devout and virtuous. It was Weems who popularized the sweet potato dinner anecdote and other heroic episodes. As a result, his exploits became part of American folklore. Over time, more scholarly biographies sought to separate fact from fiction. In the 1840s, novelist and historian William Gilmore Simms wrote a biography of Marion that, while still patriotic in tone, was more grounded in historical evidence than Weems' romanticized version. In the 20th century, historians like Hugh Rankin revisited Marion's life with academic rigor, attempting to strip away the myth and verify what he actually did. They found that, fortunately, the real Francis M. Marion has not been entirely obscured by his legend. Based on these factual accounts, he truly deserves to be remembered as one of the heroes of the War for Independence, as historian Busick has noted. He was not a flawless folk hero, but a complex man who rose to meet an hour of need. He did own slaves, inherited through his plantation life, and he fought brutally against Native Americans in his youth, facts which modern perspectives rightly acknowledge. But those realities coexist with his patriotism and leadership. Understanding Marion means recognizing both the values of his 18th century context and the extraordinary contributions he made despite his flaws. Francis's legacy in American memory is profound, especially in the South. In South Carolina, he is revered as a founding father of the state's independence. Many places in the state bear his name, from Lake Marion in Marion County to Marion Square in Charleston. Beyond South Carolina, his fame spread nationwide in the 19th century, as his legend was published and republished. As a result, numerous towns and counties across the United States are named in honor of Francis. By one count, at least 16 states have a town or city named after Marion, and many more have a Marion County, making him one of the most commemorated revolutionary figures, second perhaps only to George Washington in this respect. For example, Marion, Alabama and Marion, Iowa carry his name, as do Marion counties in states from Illinois to Oregon. During the 20th century, South Carolina established the Francis Marion National Forest north of Charleston as a living tribute to the swamp fox's old stomping grounds. In 1970, a new university founded in Florence, South Carolina, was aptly named Francis Marion University, ensuring each new generation of students in the region hears the story of its namesake. American popular culture has also kept Francis's memory alive. In the 1950s and 1960s, Disney produced a television series called The Swamp Fox, starring Leslie Nielsen as Marion, which dramatized his Revolutionary War adventures for a family audience. More recently, the Hollywood film The Patriot drew inspiration from his guerrilla tactics. Mel Gibson's lead character in the film, Benjamin Martin, is a composite hero partly based on Francis, along with other Southern fighters. The movie takes liberty with history and exaggerates his exploits in blockbuster fashion, at one point turning him into a one-man army not unlike a colonial Rambo. Historians have been quick to point out the fiction.
One of the silliest things the movie did, Professor Busick observed, was to make Marion into an 18th century Rambo. The real Marion was cunning and bold, but he was no invincible superhero. He was effective because he worked with dedicated men and chose his fights wisely. Nonetheless, the Patriot introduced his spirit to new audiences and renewed interest in the Swamp Fox legend, even if the character's name was changed for the screenplay. A meaningful addition to his legacy came in 2006. President George W. Bush posthumously honored Marion's African-American aide, Oscar, with a proclamation of citizenship and gratitude. Oscar was an enslaved man who had been Francis's personal servant during the war, the very man depicted cooking sweet potatoes in John Blake White's famous painting. Like many slaves who served Patriot officers, Oscar likely fought alongside Francis in battles and provided critical support. His contributions went unrecognized for over 2 centuries. Thanks to the research of genealogist Tina Jones, one of Oscar's descendants, Oscar Marion's service was finally acknowledged, and he was recognized as a patriot in the American Revolution. This ceremony highlighted an often overlooked reality. There were others, black and white, whose roles are now being remembered. It adds a modern understanding to his legacy, showing that the fight for independence was a broad effort that included people of color, even if their names were forgotten in early tellings of the tales. In comparison to other famous historical figures of the Revolution, Francis stands out as the prototypical guerrilla leader. Where General George Washington led large conventional armies in the North, Marion operated on a smaller, irregular scale in the South. Marion's success in unconventional warfare earned him accolades as possibly the father of guerrilla warfare in America. Indeed, many later American military figures have drawn inspiration from Marion's hit-and-run tactics, from Civil War cavalry raiders to modern special forces who study partisan warfare. Marion's bravery and success in the war secured him a lasting legacy and a deserved place among legends. Thanks for listening in on our journey into the fascinating life of Francis Marion. Join us next time as we consider another of our country's greatest treasures, here on American Legacies. See you then!